Hey, Mark again from Rainmaker Consulting. Just wanted to shoot a video after listening to a podcast a couple of days ago, and where a chap by the name of Michael Bernoff was being interviewed. And the whole interview was a very short interview, but it was just fantastic stuff, and probably one of the best strategies I've heard around a framing technique, or as he explained it, getting alignment with your potential clients. So really what you're saying to a potential client is that, I know there's issues around our product or service, and my role as a professional is to obviously help you navigate through those issues, and then you make a decision that you know that you will be happy with in the long term, and you'll have no regrets. Just to give you an idea of how this could potentially work, is if I looked at my own business, obviously advising business owners on marketing and retention of clients, I could potentially, and I do say to clients when I'm with them and also in writing, is that what the biggest problem with marketing today is. It's overwhelming. And what happens when things are overwhelming? You can't make a decision. So when you can't make a decision, you start to actually lose confidence as a business owner. You start to question, obviously, your ability sometimes to run businesses. When you can't make an effective decision. So when you start to lose confidence, the other thing that happens to a lot of business owners is that they start to lose money. So I would be going through this and saying, do you know what happens when you lose confidence? You lose money. And do you know what normally happens to business owners and businesses when they start to lose money? The business owners start to get frustrated, and normally that results in treating people in the business quite poorly, and even treating themselves poorly. So it has a habit of sort of messing up the business, and at the end of the day, you stop making money, and it's far from fun. So the biggest thing I want to achieve as your marketing consultant is to make sure that obviously you make the right decisions, and this is still fun, but most importantly that you're making money. So if I was to adapt that to say financial planning, you could say something like, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you know what the problem with financial planning is today? There's too much information. And they'll agree with you. They'll say, yeah, there's a lot of information. And you say, well, you know what happens when you get too much information? You get overwhelmed. And you know what happens when you get overwhelmed? You start to make bad decisions. And you know what happens in financial planning? If you make bad decisions, you lose money. So the biggest thing I want to do as your financial advisor is to make certain you don't make bad decisions, and you definitely don't lose money. So that obviously works well, for financial planning. And if you were to think of other industries where there's potentially a lot of options, but you as the advisor might have access to all those options. So if you looked at, say, lending or mortgages, you could say, obviously, again, that Mr. and Mrs. Smith, you know what the biggest problem with getting a home loan today is? That there's too much information. And you know what happens when you get too much information? You get overwhelmed. And when you get overwhelmed, you make bad decisions. And you know what happens when you make a bad decision? Again, you lose money. In mortgages, that could be taking out the wrong type of home loan. The interest rate that you got wasn't the best. You locked into a variable when potentially you should have had a fixed loan if that was still available to you. So the biggest thing that they would be saying is that as your home loan advisor, I want to make certain you don't make a bad decision, and even more importantly, that you don't lose money. So if I was then to look at something in retail like car sales, if you think about when you go and buy a car, unless you're locked into one brand, I'm always BMW and I'm never going to change, but there is still a lot of models with BMW, and which one do you choose with what options? But, if you were looking around the general market, for an SUV or something like that, myself as a car sales advisor, I'd be saying, what the biggest problem with cars today is? There's too much choice. And you know what happens when you get too much choice? You get overwhelmed. And do you know what happens when you get overwhelmed? You make a bad decision. And obviously you're getting them to agree with you on these points, obviously. So in their mind, obviously, they've already realised that obviously these issues are there. So you could then say, what happens when you make a bad decision? You beat yourself up and regret it for a long time. Because obviously if you take home a car and then a week later, you're regretting that purchase because you now think that you possibly got the wrong model, you bought petrol instead of diesel, you didn't go for the 7 or whatever, you start to have regret. So the biggest thing I want to do as your new car sales advisor is to make sure you don't make a bad decision, and obviously, you have no regrets. If I look at something else in today's market that's hugely popular, obviously would be solar panels and the solar industry. And again, if I was in a client's home discussing, the first discussion I would have with them would be, what the biggest problem with investing in solar panels is today. There's too much choice. Where do you start? And for a lot of my clients, what happens when they get too much choice is that they get overwhelmed. And as you know, when you get overwhelmed, you start to make bad decisions. You get buyer's remorse, and also you start to question your ability to make sound buying decisions. So the main thing I want to achieve as your solar consultant today is to make sure you have no buyer's remorse. So using this formula, if you actually work through that, with your own product or service, obviously, you can sort of take them down the path of alignment, obviously. Once you're aligned with a client, obviously, the actual selling part of it, should be straightforward and easy. There shouldn't be any need for some sort of close or anything else, because it's been a logical work through, obviously, the issues that's brought them to really, the only sensible conclusion they can make, which is to invest in your product and service. So, so after hearing that, I thought it might be something that, would be of interest to other business owners out there. And for this and some other quite simple direct marketing and sales advice, just go to rainmakerconsulting.com.au. Cheers.